Michael Neary.
Taoiseach describes as constructive his meeting today with David Trimble of the Ulster Unionists. Free again, 3 suspected drug traffickers released for a second time by the district court. And a deal brokered by the Russians allows UN inspectors to return to Iraq. Good evening, welcome to 6-1. Also on the programme this evening, the Revenue Commissioner's new Get Tough policy on tax evaders.
The Taoiseach will tell EU leaders in Luxembourg tomorrow that the abolition of duty-free shopping could cost thousands of jobs here. And in Gaelic games, the Cork County Board launches an investigation into an incident involving footballer Niall Cahalane.
The Taoiseach has had his first meeting since taking office with the leader of the Ulster Unionist Party, David Trimble. Mr Ahern described the meeting, which took place at a hotel in London, as friendly and constructive. Mr Trimble said their discussion had been somewhat encouraging. During their 2-hour meeting, they talked about North-South relations, in particular the possibility of cross-border institutions and the Republic's constitutional claim to the North. The Taoiseach said afterwards that any North-South dimension to a final settlement in Northern Ireland would have to be transparent. Mr Trimble said the meeting was a beginning, but there'd have to be further discussions both inside and outside the Stormont talks.
The Taoiseach and the Minister for Foreign Affairs left the Sheraton Hotel in Belgravia this afternoon after a lengthy session over lunch with the Ulster Unionist team. On the menu, quail salad, monkfish and chocolate mousse. On the agenda, the exact structure and powers of any future cross-border institutions and the future of Articles 2 and 3 of the Irish Constitution. David Trimble believes Irish commitments on Articles 2 and 3 to date are too vague. After the meeting, Mr Ahern said the Irish position as outlined in Stormont still stood.
We have already set down our compromises at this stage on those issues as per Article 21 of the framework document. They were understandings and compromises which were reached in our discussions pre the framework document's presentation in February 1995, when, of course, we were in government last.
The other sticking point is executive powers for any future cross-border bodies. David Trimble has already ruled that out.
My views on this are fairly well known. We consider it absolutely necessary that North-South dimensions in a real, meaningful and transparent role be part of whatever agreements that we conclude.
Realistic, practical and encouraging talks, said David Trimble, but they didn't cover the technicalities of Articles 2 and 3.
We did make it clear that there has to be substantial change, and change that is going to be, as it were, judge-proof. We can't have a situation where things are agreed and then it later turns out in perhaps an Irish Supreme Court decision that it means something quite different to what was thought. So there will be matters, it will be important at some point to get down and to look at the technicalities. We spelled out the need for that to happen, and I think there is an appreciation on the part of the Irish government of the need to do this.
If the Ulster Unionists are prepared to sit in the same room with Sinn Féin in Stormont, why did this meeting have to be held in secret?
Well, in the first case, it wasn't in secret. It has been announced, as far as I can see, extensively, and the very fact that so many of the international media were here in London today to meet myself and David Andrews shows that it wasn't very secret. There were certain arrangements that Mr Trimble asked us to comply with, and I was very glad to do that.
Well, our correspondent Brian O'Connell joins us now from London. Good evening, Brian.
Hello.
As we heard in your report there, the circumstances of the meeting were quite unusual, but I gather the mood was quite upbeat.
Yes, I think it was, Eileen. Both sides seemed fairly optimistic afterwards. It was a long and detailed discussion. It lasted for just over 2 hours, although they didn't get into the nitty-gritty of exactly what would need to be changed, for example, in Ireland's constitutional claim to Northern Ireland or anything like that. But what they have agreed to do is to meet again, so there will be a series of meetings inside and outside the Stormont talks with Ulster Unionists at various levels, going right up to the Taoiseach and Mr Trimble. And it was the first meeting that Bertie Ahern has had since he became Taoiseach with the Ulster Unionists. So in that sense, I don't think anybody expected any solutions out of this, but certainly they did go round the tracks on those two main issues of cross-border bodies and Articles 2 and 3.
Well, as you say, those were the main issues. We also had reports and suggestions earlier in the week that David Trimble seemed to be hardening his attitude to the whole talks process. Was there any indication of that today, or do you think the sides are any closer after today's meeting?
I don't think they're any closer to reaching an agreement on those particular issues. But David Trimble has been saying, as you say, that he is concerned about the Irish government's commitment to changing Articles 2 and 3. You heard the Taoiseach there say that any change would have to be as part of an overall settlement. That's laid out in the framework document. And as far as the Irish are concerned, any cross-border bodies would have to have executive powers. Transparency is the word the Taoiseach used today. So I don't think they're any closer, but I think the fact that this meeting has taken place at all is in itself a step forward.
And do you think how will that upbeat mood transfer to the meeting between Bertie Ahern and Tony Blair tomorrow?
It will, I think, yes. Remember, Bertie Ahern and Tony Blair met shortly after the general election here. In fact, the Taoiseach was the first foreign leader, if I remember correctly, to come to Downing Street to see Tony Blair after he was elected. But Tony Blair is behind David Trimble on one thing, and that is that there must be a firmer commitment from the Irish on Articles 2 and 3. That's why David Trimble is pushing this so hard. He knows that he has the Prime Minister behind him, and no doubt Tony Blair will be reiterating that point to the Taoiseach again when they meet in Luxembourg.
Thank you, Brian, for that.
The British government has described those who left a bomb at Belfast City Hall this morning as cynical and calculating people intent on causing death and destruction. The device was made safe. It contained a small amount of commercial explosives. It was discovered on the same day that it was announced that just over 200 British soldiers are to be transferred out of Northern Ireland.
The small bomb was planted outside the Progressive Unionist and Ulster Democratic Party offices. Loyalists are in no doubt, Republicans are to blame. But the device contained a small amount of commercial explosive, which is normally used by loyalist groups. If anything, it underlines Unionist security fears. But with an overall reduction in paramilitary activity, it's been decided to move just over 200 troops out of the north. It came as no surprise. Soldiers from the Belfast Reinforcement Battalion, a parachute regiment, had already been moved from North and West Belfast to the Maze. It's the first reduction in troop levels since the renewed IRA ceasefire. Adam Ingram was asked, would the trend continue?
Any transfer of troops back to Britain or any other movement in this area will be done on the basis of the assessed situation at any point in time. So the answer to that we would hope would be yes, because it's an indication of us moving towards a more normal society.
Predictably, the move has been welcomed by nationalists, criticised by unionists.
We fear that there will be more street disorders and attacks on property and individuals, and it's not a time to take the troops out of Northern Ireland.
There are those in the north of Ireland who indulge in self-fulfilling prophecies. I think that's a very dangerous type of thing to be doing. We have got peace. That peace has been there. That peace should be accompanied by visible signs on the streets.
There are still around 17,000 troops in the north. Any large-scale reductions are unlikely to happen until security chiefs are satisfied. Both loyalists and Republicans have given up violence for good. The 200 troops will leave over the next few days. They will return to Aldershot in England, where they'll remain on standby. The Secretary of State says a terrorist threat still exists, and it's important that both the British government and the security forces don't drop their guard. Michael O'Kane, RTE News, Belfast.
The three men who were rearrested